Welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast, where we reframe current issues through the lens of ancient wisdom. This week, we look at the controversy out of Chino Hills School District, where the new parental notification policy has sparked a massive debate. According to the new policy, parents must be notified if students begin identifying as the opposite sex, using different names or pronouns, or using bathrooms or locker rooms of the opposite gender. This issue is so potent that even the Attorney General of California is investigating and may press charges against the school district. What does this say about how our society views the role of parents and educators in raising children? Unknown musical artist Oliver Anthony became an overnight sensation when his song, Men North of Richmond, went massively viral. This song is a stinging and very direct critique of the government that millions of people feel they can relate to. Others have critiqued the song as unkind or hypocritical, some even as racist somehow. Why has this song touched such a nerve, and who is the real Oliver Anthony? Throughout the devastating Maui wildfires that have claimed over 100 lives at this point, the response from Joe Biden has been sharply criticized. From taking multiple vacations as the fire raged to answering no comment when asked his thoughts on the tragedy, now Biden has made it to the island and may have come under his sharpest criticism yet, exposing what I see as a pattern in his leadership that I think needs to be examined and a habit that all of us could learn from. All of that and one look at the drama surrounding the real-life NFL player from the hit movie The Blind Side. Michael Orr, now retired from the NFL, says he just learned this year that the family who took him in never legally adopted him and that they have profited off of his story without him ever receiving compensation for it. The Tui family, made famous by Sandra Bullock and Tim McGraw in the movie, dispute all of his claims and say they are bringing receipts to prove their innocence. So who is the villain in this story, and what can we learn about how easy it is to drive a wedge through a fairy tale story? Let's find out together on episode 29 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. Well, welcome to episode 29. Thank you guys so much for rocking with us. I'd love for you to follow me if you're new to the channel on Instagram or Twitter at Clayton Tyner. That's Clayton Tyner. Make sure that you are liking, commenting, sharing, and most importantly, subscribing. If you listen on audio only, I want to really encourage you at some point to come over to youtube.com/Clayton Tyner. That's Tyner, and subscribe to the YouTube channel where we're putting the majority of our effort right now. Also, if you want to see what my real job is, you can go to youtube.com/MetaChurch. I'd love for you to subscribe there and check out some of the sermons. We have been in a very exciting series. This Sunday was like a watershed moment in the life of our church as we presented the vision of where we believe God is taking us for the next 5, 10, and 15 years. We're dreaming very big dreams, and we believe that God will see them through. And I have very big dreams for this podcast and for this YouTube channel, and you guys are making that possible. We've been hustling, we've been grinding, we've been consistent when we're putting out content, and guess what? 500 subscribers. Yeah, let's go. Thank you for everyone who has subscribed, man. Anything you do, any way you interact just tells the YouTube algorithm that it should pay attention to this channel. It should pay attention to this content. I'm consistently looking for ways to improve this, to get better content out, to package it better. I'm trying to learn all the behind the scenes stuff. It really has been so much fun. What we do here is we take current issues, stories that are in the news, in the zeitgeist, and we try to look at them through the ancient wisdom of Scripture so that we can have a nuanced view. If you are a believer in Jesus, so that you can display your Christian faith while living in the real world. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. And if you're not a believer, then maybe you can see like how Christians might view some of the things that are going on, hopefully from like a somewhat normal, not crazy person who also really does believe in Jesus. So we've got some interesting stories to get to today. So without further ado, let's get to our 3 points. The state of California is letting its stance be known very clearly. Schools now have primacy in raising your children. This became crystal clear when the Attorney General for the state opened an investigation into Chino Hills School District for a new policy pertaining to parental rights. So, what is this wild, crazy, outlandish, dastardly policy that requires the Attorney General to get involved? Here it is. Chino Hills no longer allows its adults to keep children's secrets from parents. While this may seem like a policy that's based on common sense and something you would expect all schools to follow, that is no longer the case in California. We are going to pull up and look at a local newscast from the Los Angeles area, and they'll tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Now at 11, a very heated Chino Valley School Board meeting tonight. Hundreds of people gathering to voice their opinions about a controversial parent notification policy. The meeting getting hostile after a brief exchange between the school board president and state school superintendent Tony Thurmond. Thurmond escorted out by security. The hours-long meeting had dozens of people expressing their opinions during public comment on the policy that would require schools to notify parents if their child identifies as transgender or wants to use a different bathroom. Eyewitness News reporter Amy Powell has more on tonight's raucous school board.
So there we go. Now, I'm going to pull up, this is the Attorney General of California's website, just so it's not like, look, I just get the best articles that I can, and sometimes they're from really far left-leaning publications, and sometimes they're from right-leaning publications, but whatever just reads the best and gets the facts out the best, just so no one can like claim, that this is some crazy, right-wing or left-wing conspiracy. This is from a .gov website. This is the Attorney General of California, oag.ca.gov. Attorney General launches civil rights investigation into Chino Valley Unified's policy of forced gender status disclosure. Now, one of the things that politicians are really good at, and I tend to feel like on the left of politics, they are quite a bit better than the right. They're really, really good with words. There's a book I read several years ago. I think it's called Words That Win or something like that. And it's from the guy who was behind, George Bush's campaign. I think he also was a consultant on Bill Clinton's campaign. And he just was like, if you want to win, you want to get a winning message, you got to get your words right. And they're so good at controlling words. And so what do they call it? A forced gender status disclosure. They're going to use some other words that I think are very specifically used. California Attorney General Rob Bonta today announced opening a civil rights investigation into potential legal violations by the Chino Valley Unified School District, which adopted a policy that forces schools to out students whose gender identities may be changing. Okay, so there's another, you have to out them, which sounds like you're going to take a picture of them or put a sandwich board on them and stand them on a milk carton and shame them in front of everyone. What they're actually saying is if a student tells you in secret they're making a life-changing decision, you got to tell the parents, right? That's all it actually is. So this may out students. Enacted in July, the parental notification policy requires schools to inform parents with minimal exceptions whenever a student requests to use a name or pronoun different from that on their birth certificate or official records, even if such disclosure is against the student's wishes or could expose a student to parental abuse or increase the risk of self-harm or suicide. We'll go back to that. The policy also requires notification if a student accesses facilities or participates in programs that don't align with their sex on official records. Attorney General sent a letter last month to superintendent and the Board of Education emphasizing the potential infringements on students' civil and privacy rights and educational opportunities. So you could out them, right? This is always the danger when it comes to conversations of gender, is that this could lead to harm or suicide. This could lead to abuse. Now, that is already covered. If you have abusive parents at all, and you live in the United States of America, you are required federally by law to notify CPS if you believe a child is in danger. You already have to do that. So if there is a parent who you said, hey, your kid's struggling with gender identity, or your kid is asking to use the girls' locker room, even though on his official transcripts it says that he's a male, if that child, or if that child is going to be in actual physical danger because of that, you have another issue with the parents. That has nothing to do with this, right? And what we often do in political conversations is we argue to the anomalies. We do this all of the time, right? When you have the abortion conversation with people, what everyone wants to talk about are the less than 2%, somewhere around 1% of incidences where the life of the mother is at risk, or where there was an episode of incest, or where there was rape. They want to talk about the 1%, but really the 1% is an obfuscation, because they actually aren't going to budge on the abortion issue at all. They just want to argue from the extremes, or they want to argue from the area of most emotion. And so what we should create policies around is just normal parents. And how this would read if it wasn't cloaked in political language is, we have a new policy at our school that we're not going to keep secrets from parents.
Wow.
That's it. And to make the opposite argument, which the Attorney General is making, is we believe that your student, who is your child, should be able to go to a teacher or the librarian or their counselor or their vice principal, and they should be able to share secrets, and that secret is now going to be kept from the parent. That's the argument. And that is a bad argument. That is a really bad, really dangerous policy. And you're beginning to hear people talk about our kids, and the educators are beginning to talk at the highest levels, like at the level of their unions, about how these are our children. And they're just not. They're not your children. They belong to their parents. This has been the way that things have worked forever. And for people who are not parents, you might not have the same level of just visceral reaction to this. But if you are a parent and your daughter is now using the men's locker room, your daughter is now using the male restrooms, your daughter is now changing her name and her pronouns and identifying differently, the idea that you don't have a right as their parent to know that is simply outlandish. It's like, how are we at a place where I even have to make an argument for this? This just seems like so much common sense. And to posit the parents as the enemy of the children, when it is the parents' primary responsibility to raise their kids, to discipline their kids. And here's what good parents do. In a loving way, they always help their kids line up with reality. Because when someone is living in opposition to reality, they are living in, number one, an untenable way, but they're living in a way that is going to create massive anxiety, that is going to spiral them into depression, that is going to potentially cause a mental break at some point, because you can't fight reality. It's like gravity. Gravity is just there. I can remember being like 7 and wanting to fly so bad. I loved Superman, the idea that I could just fly. I remember we lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was a weird kid, and I just I had high hopes. I still have high hopes, very optimistic. And I can remember being in my backyard and just thinking, if I just believe this hard enough, I am just going to Peter Pan right out of this backyard. I don't know what my plan was after that, I don't know where I was going to fly. I didn't know directions. I barely knew where our house was in the city. But man, if I just believe, my parents were going to look out the window and, is that Clayton flying around the neighborhood? I thought it could really happen, and it couldn't. And gravity lined me back up to reality, right? Still to this point, I've never flown. Odds are, never will. And reality matters. And especially for young people, they can get distanced from reality very, very quickly. And when that happens, they put themselves in a very dangerous position. It has been the understanding throughout all of human history that, there are definitely in more village-centered, communal-centered Eastern communities, the idea that everyone raises your kids, everyone, like I've spent a lot of time in Haiti. Anyone can spank your kid in Haiti. Your kid's acting up, they might get spanked by anyone, and anyone might feed your kid, if they're hungry, they might get fed by the neighbor, and everybody knows each other. That's a really beautiful communal thing. But everybody understands that the rights and the responsibility to that kid ultimately end with the parent. And that's always been understood. And it's certainly understood in scripture. In Proverbs, the very first chapter, it says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck." Now, are there bad parents? Absolutely. Are there abusive parents? Yes. Are there authoritarian parents? Yes. There are also parents who are enabling their children to live in delusion, which can be and often is just as dangerous and just as deadly as an overly authoritarian parent. So we're not going to argue from the anomalies. We're not going to argue from the most fringe emotion-laden position. We're going to argue from the median. We're going to argue from the norm. Good parents who love their kids and are trying to do the best. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it." The entire corpus of scripture assumes, when it gives instructions like this, that these instructions are to the parents. They're not to the teacher. They're not to the babysitter. They're not even to the high school football coach. They are to the parents. It is a parent's job. And one of the things that's happening is parents are abdicating their responsibility to raise their kids to the other professionals around them. And so the educators get to teach them every single thing about how the world works, even though the education system is really teaching you how to pass tests usually, and not actually how to grow in knowledge and wisdom. Parents aren't talking to their kids much. They're certainly not talking about the basic fundamental realities of life. They're not instilling correct ideology or correct belief systems. Even Christian parents are often just abdicating the spiritual growth and responsibility to the spiritual professionals, the youth pastors and the preacher on Sunday and the Sunday school teachers. Like, the buck stops with you and how you're going to raise your kid and how you're going to line them up to reality. Ephesians 6 actually echoes the 10 Commandments and says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother," which is the first commandment that also has a promise attached to it, "so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land." Parents raise their kids, and you need to be aware of what's going on at your schools. We're in Texas. We're in a place where there's not a whole lot of crazy happening, but even here in San Antonio, there have been things happen in some of the schools around that have made the local news, and parents are just shocked, and they don't know what's going on, and they don't know what's happening with their kids, and parents deserve to know. And the very last thing that we need are teachers keeping secrets with our children from us. That is about as inappropriate of a situation as I can imagine. Viral sensation Oliver Anthony, real name Christopher Lunsford, took the world by storm with his viral hit Men North of Richmond. The folk/country/protest song took aim directly at a government who many believe have given up on hardworking men and women throughout the country. Within a week, 3 of the top 10 songs streamed belonged to the high school dropout from Virginia. So what explains this viral success? If you have been living under a rock and you have not heard any of the song, the Men North of Richmond, I'm going to play a little bit of it for you here.
I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for both pay, so I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away. It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is.
So that's a little bit of Oliver Anthony's song. Powerful, soulful. His story is basically he was filming himself playing songs on his iPhone. He's been through a deeply depressed time. He lives in a difficult situation. He started playing guitar, writing songs, and just putting them out for the world. And, 12 people would watch it or whatever. And trust me, I'm not dogging him for that. I have many videos on this channel with 12 views.
Wow.
He's just out there, And so a couple of weeks ago, he put out a post. He said, "Look, I filmed my first song with an actual microphone. I'm going to put it out, see if we can get some traction." And man, he definitely underestimated the traction it was going to get. It blew up. tens of millions of views and listens across all different platforms. He's had so many people reach out to him. He was invited to some kind of fair there in Virginia. Like 12,000 people showed up, and they're all singing along to his song. Just this Friday, we were taking our oldest son up to college. And in the hotel we were staying in, there was live music and the guy's covering all kinds of songs. And all of a sudden, he's covering this song, like a song that literally just came out from a guy that no one has ever heard of. And the song is very direct. It doesn't really mince words. It's creative in how it lays out its protest, but it's quite direct, and it feels very real. It feels like it is coming from a place of very deep authenticity. And like happens when fame comes your way, if you want to watch a very interesting documentary, watch Johnny Football on Netflix right now. Now, warning, there's a lot of bad language in there. So if you're going to watch it with your kids or something, just be warned. But it really, really does a great job just showing how fame can absolutely swallow somebody up. And so fame has come his way, and people are digging into his life, and people are dissecting his song. Christianity Today said that his song doesn't do a good job loving its neighbor, because that's what Jesus has called us to do. And as a Christian, pastor of a Christian church, I certainly believe that. A few things I think Christianity Today didn't quite take into account is he didn't put this out as a gospel song. Like, this is not a Christian song. It's got bad words in it. Some people are complaining about that, that he uses some foul language in the song. It's like a protest song. I think we have to set our expectations appropriately. Now, you can be offended by the bad language. You can be offended by how he talks about people who are taking advantage of welfare. You can have your opinions on that. People have said just completely unfoundedly that the song is racist because Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. And so people north of Richmond were the Union. And that has nothing to do with this. The rich men north of Richmond are the politicians in Washington, D.C. That's who he's referencing. People have dug in and said, this guy is playing the part of a guy who's like poor and down and out, but he lives on like a bunch of acres there in Virginia. So Oliver Anthony responded to all of this. I think we were, first of all, surprised to learn that's not actually his name. He went to Facebook, and we'll read a little bit about who he says he is. He says, my legal name is Christopher Anthony Lunsford. My grandfather was Oliver Anthony, and Oliver Anthony music is a dedication not only to him, but to 1930s Appalachia, where he was born and raised. Dirt floors, 7 kids, hard times. At this point, I'll gladly go by Oliver because everyone knows me as such. In 2010, I dropped out of high school at age 17. I have a GED from Spruce Pine, North Carolina. I worked multiple plant jobs in Western North Carolina, my last being at the paper mill in McDowell County. I worked third shift 6 days a week for $14.50 an hour in a living hell. In 2013, I had a bad fall at work. I fractured my skull, forced me to move back to Virginia. From 2014 until just a few days ago, I've worked outside sales in the industrial manufacturing world. My job has taken me all over Virginia and into the Carolinas, getting to know tens of thousands of other blue-collar workers on job sites and in factories. I've spent all day, every day for the last 10 years hearing the same story. People are so tired of being neglected, divided, and manipulated. In 2019, I paid $97,500 for the property and still owe about $60,000 on it. I'm living in a 27-foot camper with a tarp on the roof that I got off of Craigslist for $750. There's nothing special about me. I'm not a good musician. I'm not a very good person. I've spent the last 5 years struggling with mental health and using alcohol to drown it. I'm sad to see the world in the state it's in, with everyone fighting with each other. I've spent many nights feeling hopeless that the greatest country on earth is quickly fading away. That being said, I hate the way the internet has divided us. The internet is a parasite. He says, when is enough? When are we going to fight for what is right? Millions have died protecting our liberties. Freedom of speech is such a precious gift. Never in world history has the world had the freedom it currently does. Don't let them take it away from you. Just like those once wandering in the desert, we've lost our way from God and have let false idols distract us and divide us. It's a shame. So that is him straight from the horse's mouth. Now, he could be lying. I don't think he is, but that's who he is. That's what he's been through. That's yes, he has some land. To afford the land, he lives in a $750 trailer that he has to put a tarp over because the roof leaks. In other words, he is the real deal. And a lot of people are trying to figure out exactly why this song from this guy has hit just so hard. And I think it comes down to 2 primary things. One is passion and one is authenticity. And when passion and authenticity meet and mix, they create believability. Passion plus authenticity equals believability. This guy, without knowing who he is, without ever hearing a word from him, just hearing the conviction in his voice, the setting that he's singing in, the words that he wrote, he was believable. And this is a nonpartisan issue. People on both sides, and I don't mean the rich men north of Richmond, I mean normal, everyday, average, middle class, and below Americans, left, right, and center, all believe that the government doesn't actually care about them. Now, there are some people who are idealists and they want a very big government, and the government is their blankie, and that's what they think. But when you actually pay attention to how the government works, the government is not looking after normal, average, everyday people's interest, first, second, third, or 10th. They have so many conflicts of interest. They have conflicts of interest with the people who lobby them, with the big businesses who support them, with their constituents who scream the loudest, that normal, everyday, average Americans, we are not the priority, even though they are the representatives, and the people they're supposed to be representing are average, everyday Americans. And so this is not a guy who's living in Beverly Hills, right? I think the reason that this just jumped past a lot of country music is because this is a guy who actually lives in the country, and he's just writing songs that probably would have been edited to no end were he on a music label, but that were just real and coming out of a place of authenticity and coming out of a place of passion. Proverbs 28 says, "Better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than a rich man who is crooked in his ways." Jesus said to the Pharisees, "You are like whitewashed tombs, which appear beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of the bones of dead and every kind of impurity." In other words, you're not believable. You're not authentic. You're hiding who you actually are. In the Message in Luke 12, Jesus tells his disciples, you can't keep your true self hidden forever. Before long, you will be exposed. I think the world is desperate for authenticity, and the world is desperate for passion. And that's one of the things that is so attractive about Jesus when we get Jesus right. When our view of Jesus is the Christians who are judgmental and hypocrites and angry and overly political, then we get a view of Jesus who wasn't who he actually was on earth. I know a lot of people have a problem with the TV series The Chosen, but what Dallas Jenkins is trying to do is to recover the authentic feel of what it would have been like to be with Jesus, to be with someone who was perfectly loving. What Jesus did on the cross is literally called the Passion. Jesus was fully authentic, like 100%, the most authentic person who ever walked the earth. And he was 100% passionate. He gave it all the time. Because of that, he's believable. He's an actual historical figure who actually died on a Roman cross. And so many hundreds of people actually believed that he rose again that they started a movement that I'm still a part of 2,000 years later on a continent that wasn't yet discovered by the people who wrote the scriptures. Like this movement, Jesus said, I'm going to start this movement, and even the power of hell cannot stand against it. And that has proven true. However, when we distort who Jesus is, because a lot of times, one of the Desert Fathers said that you are often the only Bible that anyone will ever read. And so when Christians don't live authentic and passionate lives, people don't get to see who our authentic and passionate leader is. And when we get that right, we become incredibly powerful. And that is the magnet that is the good news of Jesus. When people see Christians who are real, they're not trying to live with some facade of perfection, or they have it all figured out. They're not using judgment and legalism to keep everyone at arm's length. They're passionate. That's the other thing, man. You walk into too many churches and too many religious experiences today, and people just don't even look like they want to be there. The people on stage don't even look like they want to be there. Authentic and passionate. I think that has drawn people into Oliver Anthony. Like, I don't know who this guy is. I don't really know what the deal is, but man, he feels like the real deal. You know, I see this trend to go to a completely different genre of rap and hip hop. I see this trend with Drake, right? Because when Drake first came out, to me, he was the wheelchair guy from Degrassi, you know?
Wow.
And he came out, I think, trying to shake off that reputation. And so a lot of his music was really like gangster, you know, I'm an OG and don't front and don't step to me, don't step to my boys, and we got the guns. And it's like, okay, you know, I mean, when 50 Cent does that, it's authentic. That's the life that he lived. You know, when Eminem talks about coming from the streets and coming from poverty and being a nobody, it's like, yeah, man, you actually feel that. And you can hate that music and despise it and think it's evil and whatever else you think about it. But it's authentic. And there's a real passion behind it. And it becomes believable. And people are looking for things that are believable. And so they're drawn to it. And I know Drake, he had a lot of heat on him earlier. I'm not going to pretend like he wasn't like popping. But for a lot of people, the argument was, isn't that the kid from like the teenage soap opera? And now he's a gangster? Isn't he like from Toronto and raised in wealth, you know? And he's talking about the streets. Like, it just didn't make any sense. And what happened is along the way, it's like Drake settled into who he actually is. And his songs became kind of carefree. And he would even start really poking fun at himself. A lot of self-deprecating humor, a lot of awkward humor, songs that were more about just having a good time and how I have a lot of money and how, well, that's real. That's authentic to who he is. He does like to have a good time. He does have a lot of money, you know? He is a genius marketer. You know, he is a global brand. So talk about those things. That's authentic. And you can be passionate about it and you're believable. And you don't really hear that side of the arguments against Drake anymore because he's just leaned in to who he is authentically. And the mask will come off eventually. Like you will be exposed. And so if you are a believer and you're trying to live like you're perfect all the time and you're trying to cast shade on everybody else, then the mask will come off. You're not perfect. And the Apostle Paul says, I'm not going to brag about my strengths. My strengths are relatively few. I'm going to brag about my weaknesses because it's in my weaknesses. It's in my vulnerability. It's in my authenticity that Jesus is actually shown to be strong. And I think we should hold on to that. I think Richmond, north of Richmond, has taken off because it's authentic and it's passionate. And authenticity and passion create believability. And everyone is looking for something that they can believe in. Joe Biden has been sharply criticized for his response to the Maui wildfires. From sitting on a Delaware beach, then onto a Lake Tahoe vacation, the tardiness of the president has been widely noted. After finally arriving on the island, President Biden took the stage at a local event and compared the utter devastation of an entire community with a small kitchen fire he once suffered. Let's go to the tape.
I don't want to compare difficulties, but we have a little.
Then don't, right? I don't want to compare here. You know, no need for comparison. I don't want to do this. You do want to do it because you're gonna do it.
Wow. Sense, Jill and I, what it's like to lose a home. Years ago, now 15 years ago, I was in Washington doing Meet the Press. It was a sunny Sunday, and lightning struck at home on a little lake. It's outside of our home, not a lake, a big pond, and hit a wire and came up underneath our home into the heating ducts, the air conditioning duct. To make a long story short, I almost lost my wife, my 67 Corvette, and my cat.
Okay. This is so bad. It's so cringy. It's so out of touch. I almost lost my 67 Corvette. Now I know that most of you here who live on the island are relatively middle to lower class, middle to lower income. And you could never own a 67 Corvette. But don't worry, my 67 Corvette is fine. Now, this will be shocking to you because politicians, they are as pure as the driven snow. When they say something, you can take it to the bank. They never, ever, ever falsify. So this is going to shock you. But the story he's telling is grossly exaggerated. This happened in 2004, right? We can just you were a sitting senator. We can just look at the news reports. It was reported as a small kitchen fire. It was caused by lightning. That was true. A small kitchen fire that produced smoke that the fire department says they put out relatively quickly. They did say it could have been bad, but they got there very quick and it didn't spread past the kitchen. And you don't know what it's like to lose a home because you have more homes and it was just your kitchen. You know what it's like to have to remodel a kitchen. I'm sure that's very frustrating. I'm sure your favorite pots and pans were in there, but you don't know what it's like to lose a home. And even if you did lose your home, you got other homes, right? So often people walk into situations where others are grieving and they just don't know what to do. And so I'm being harsh, and I'm probably not done with that. I expect a lot out of my leaders, being a little bit harsh. But I do want to be fair as well, that this isn't just something that Joe Biden uniquely struggles with. When we walk in and people are deeply grieving, and this is something that I have to do a lot as a pastor. I show up in some of the worst moments in people's lives. I officiate a lot of funerals, and I've had to learn how to navigate grieving people. And this is something we will all have to do. You will have friends and family members and coworkers who go through extreme suffering because there is real suffering in this world. And when we don't know what to do, more often than not, we just do way too much. Grieving people do not need comparison. They need compassion. He started off by saying, I don't want to compare, but then went on for 3 minutes to compare something that's literally a nothing to probably by the end of this, hundreds of people who are dead, hundreds more who are missing, total loss of property. This isn't like my cat's eyebrows got singed and it got close to my Corvette. This is like the loss of an entire community. Like, hey, I know your entire family was just murdered in front of you. Have I ever told you about the hangnail I got 17 years ago? It was really, really bad. People do not need comparison. They need compassion. And there is a time and a place for building equity and empathy with people if you have actually gone through what they've gone through. If someone loses their mother and you have lost your mother and they know you've lost your mother, then you have a unique opportunity. And this is part of how God redeems even the worst parts of our story, even the most painful parts of our history. God redeems that because it builds equity and empathy with people who you can uniquely speak to. Heaven forbid, but people who have lost children, they have an ability to stand with other people who lose children in a way that most people just can't. But even when you have a direct connection and direct correlation, what they need up front is still not your comparison. That isn't how you lead. What they need is compassion. The Greek word for compassion, it's a compound word that comes from the idea of eating the insides of an animal. So like literally eating you from the inside out. That's what compassion does. It just stirs us in such an extreme way. Romans 12 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Proverbs 18:13 says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and his shame. One of the more interesting books of the Old Testament is the book of Job. Most people are convinced this isn't a historical story, that it is ancient Greek poetry. Excuse me. And Job goes through almost immeasurable suffering. He loses his wife. He loses all of his kids. He loses all of his resources, everything, his homes, everything. And what's interesting is at the very beginning of the story, some of Job's friends come over, and the first thing they do is write. They really nail this. It says, when Job's 3 friends heard about all this adversity that happened to him, each of them came from his home. They met together to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. Then they sat on the ground with him 7 days and nights, but no one spoke a word to him because they saw that his suffering was very intense. They were just there. They were just present. And sometimes the greatest present you can give someone is your presence, is just being with them. You're not going to have the magic words. When someone is really suffering, when a community has lost all of their homes and all of their vehicles and all of their lands and many loved ones and don't know if they're getting their property back, you don't have the right words to say. You cannot take that pain away from them. You can't crack the right joke that's going to make them, forget their troubles. And you certainly can't draw a comparison to something that has nothing to do with that. This is a pattern that we're seeing in President Biden's leadership. when Gold Star families are interacting with the president, they're reporting. This has happened multiple times, and he's actually done it in public press conferences as well, where it's like, I know what you're going through because I also lost a kid in battle. And twofold, just like he didn't almost lose a house, he had a kitchen fire, he did not lose a son in battle. His son was a veteran, and then later died from cancer. Two very different things. And when you tell someone whose son was just killed in Iraq, Jill and I know exactly how you feel. We brought our son home in a flagged drape coffin as well, which is number one, just lying. And number two, they don't need your comparison. They just need your compassion. They just need to hear that you are so sorry for what they're going through. They just need to know that you'll do whatever they need you to do, that they get to set the pace. You're not trying to squeeze something out of them. When you go into a grieving person with comparison, the number one thing it is immensely selfish. It's like, I have a part of this too. I'm in this with you guys too. And you're just not. Even if you have lost in the exact same way they have lost, months before or years before, you're not sitting where they are on their journey of grief. People need compassion. They don't just need comparison. There is time for the next steps, that there is time to walk alongside of them. There is time to lift their spirits, but it's not in the earliest moments of grieving. And we should remember that, because all of us will deal with very, very real grief. All of us will need to stand by people in our lives. And if you can learn from this and learn how to just be present and to lead with compassion, you don't need the answers. You need to be present. You need to be open to what they need. You need to be responsive to how they act and what they ask for, but do not lead with comparison. Now let's get to our last section. In 2009, the world was introduced to the story of Michael Oher and the Toohey family in the hit movie The Blind Side. Oher was a teenager who had bounced in and out of foster care and ended up attending the school where the Tooheys were involved. The family brought him into their house, and Michael Oher joined the football team. The feel-good story ended with Michael getting a scholarship to Ole Miss and eventually being drafted to the NFL. That feel-good story has now taken a dramatic turn. Michael Oher, now retired from the NFL, is suing the Tooheys for lying to him, withholding money, and profiting off of his story. The Tooheys deny all these claims and, somewhat ironically, feel blindsided by the entire lawsuit. This has gained a lot of attention. It really was almost like a fairy tale story. And of course it was. Things that get made into movies kind of resemble fairy tales. It has a happy ending. It's got tension in the middle. It's got struggle. People have to deal and change and grow and form their character. And it was a hit movie. I mean, it made hundreds of millions of dollars. And now, Michael Oher, who is retired from the NFL, he played most of his time with the Baltimore Ravens. He has come out and made some claims that, after further investigation, are suspicious at best. Let's take a look at some of what he's saying. There's a write-up of a lot of the claims that he's making. It says, while promoting his latest book, When Your Back's Against the Wall, former NFL star Michael Oher leveled some shocking news about the fairy tale life depicted in the Academy Award-winning movie The Blind Side. In court papers filed on August 14th, Oher states that he was not adopted as a teenager by Tennessee family Shauna and Leanne Toohey, portrayed by Sandra Bullock and Tim McGraw. Instead, he says he was placed in a conservatorship, unbeknownst to him. He claims that the conservatorship gave away his rights to sign contracts and to make education and medical decisions, potentially costing him money. Throughout Oher's football career, where he played for the Baltimore Ravens primarily, did he believe he was adopted? So the Tooheys have come back, and they have completely denied all of these allegations. Oher said he was told that they intended to legally adopt him and instructed to call them mom and dad. Up until that point, Oher's life had been far from stable. He was placed in foster care when he was 11. He attended 11 schools in 9 years and eventually ended up homeless for a time. He was introduced to the Tooheys through an acquaintance. They took him into their large, beautiful home and went out with him shopping. Shortly after he moved in, they presented him with conservatorship papers, but told him that because he was over the age of 18, the legal action to adopt Michael would have to be called a conservatorship. But it was, for all intents and purposes, an adoption. He's also claiming that they owe him all kinds of money. He's demanding an accounting to be conducted, saying that the Toohey family, including their children, Sean and Collins, negotiated the rights to the movie with 20th Century Fox, each receiving $225,000 plus 2.5% of all future profits of the movie, which went on to gross $330 million. He accused the family of reaping millions while he received nothing for his families. The attorney for the Tuohys released a scathing statement denying any wrongdoing. The statement, in which the Tuohys still refer to Orr as their son, said the family made hundreds of millions in the restaurant business and that the claims that they would disgorge money from Orr were hurtful and absurd. The lawyer said the notion that a couple worth hundreds of millions of dollars would connive to withhold a few $1,000s in profit participation payments from anyone, let alone from someone they loved as a son, defies belief. So there's a lot going on here. Number one, he has said that he thought he was adopted. He actually says in February of 2023, he realized for the first time that he had never been legally adopted by the Tuohys. If that was true, if they had led him to believe that he was an adopted son in their family, and he found out all these years later, I can imagine that being quite harmful. However, there's some real red flags on this as well. In his 2012 memoir, he wrote this: since I was already over the age of 18 and considered an adult by the state of Tennessee, Sean and Leanne would be named as my legal conservators. They explained to me that it means pretty much the exact same thing as adoptive parents, but that the laws were just written in a way that took my age into account. Honestly, I didn't care what it was called. My mother was going to be at the hearing to agree that she supported the decision to have the Tuohys listed as my next of kin and legal conservators. So there are some questions around this. Number one, Michael did not discover that he was not adopted this year. Now, he may have rediscovered it. People forget things all the time. There are some questions around the conservatorship itself, like why wasn't he adopted? In the state of Tennessee, you can adopt someone over the age of 18. And to be in a conservatorship of someone over the age of 18, they have to have some kind of physical or mental disability. So they need someone in their corner to sign. Now, the Tuohys are saying that this was required in order to get him into Ole Miss. I don't know how, I don't know why, but there are kind of some fuzzy questions around there. The other issue is whether or not they've been making all kinds of money off of the movie The Blind Side, and he hasn't been making any money off of that. So this has been answered by the actual author of the book that The Blind Side movie was based off of. He says that the only person who got anything off of the movie was him, that he received and then gave 50% to the Tuohys. And at the end of it, that 50% was worth about $70,000. The Tuohys claim, and they say they have a paper trail, that they split that 5 ways between Sean and Leanne and their 2 biological kids and Michael Orr, that everyone got about $14,000, and that's all the money that has been made. The other problem that Michael Orr has is that Sean and Leanne have these foundations, and they've written books, and they are profiting off of Michael Orr's story, which Michael Orr is still also profiting off of by writing his own books, like the book tour that he's on right now. So a cynical reading of this is that Michael Orr is stirring up controversy. He's retired from the NFL. He doesn't have a stream of income anymore. And now he's stirring up controversy at the exact same time that he's releasing a book. That seems like a plausible theory to me. That is a very cynical read of this. A less cynical read is based on some of the things he said, which is like, the movie made me look like I was really non-intelligent. And going back and even just looking at the trailers for the movie, it definitely does that. They have him in the trailer getting a big like F on his paper in red ink. And he actually says, I wasn't unintelligent. I was quite intelligent. That's the whole reason I was able to be in that school. And so maybe he's not exactly happy with how he was portrayed in the movie or the outcome of the movie and how it's affected him throughout his NFL career. The question is all of that, whatever is stirring inside of him, whether it's a very cynical take, which is, I'm trying to move a book and I can get a lot of attention from this, or whether we give the most charitable reading, which is maybe he really is bothered by this. Maybe he feels distant from these people who he once felt very close to. Is this the way to go about it? The Tuohys are saying that he has actually more or less blackmailed them over the last several years and said very directly, if you don't give me $15 million, then I'm going to plant some really negative stories about you. And so that's what they're communicating through their lawyer, is they have kind of felt like they were being like a shakedown on them because they are very wealthy. He sold a restaurant business for over $200 million. So they're not needing for money at this point. And so really, what's the bottom line on all of this? The blind side of the blind side. Well, number one, it's just very, very sad. And really, I think one of the things it tells us is that money uniquely has the ability to turn fairy tales into nightmares. You should read, if you never have, articles on post-lottery winners' lives, like people who win the lottery and how it absolutely destroys them. I've already mentioned it once, probably because I watched it last night. Johnny Football, the documentary on Netflix. All this fame, all this attention, all this money ruined this guy's life. He still is not fully recovered. Money uniquely has this ability, and Scripture knows that. Scripture speaks a lot about money. In 1 Timothy 6:10, it says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." Matthew 6:24, Jesus said, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." This really is a heartbreaking turn of events. I loved the movie The Blind Side when it came out. Everybody loved the movie. It really is just a great tale. And a lot of people are casting this, and this movie has been reviewed as something that promotes white saviorism, the white family who swoops in and takes care of a black kid. And if you watch the movie, the people who are challenged the most based on their character and based on like deeply ingrained beliefs are the white characters. Most of all, the Tuohys. They have to really wrestle with some inbuilt prejudice all around. It's a good movie. You look back, it's from quite a few years ago. The way it's shot and the musical score and everything, it's all pretty cheesy, but it was just a good, wholesome family movie with a good like fairy tale kind of outcome that usually doesn't happen. And the guy ends up playing in the NFL for a while and going to Ole Miss on a scholarship. And it's just a great story. And money has this unique ability to take great stories and great situations, great families, great friends, and just distort it and corrupt it. And without real principle and without real structure and without a real plan, money will change you. And the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. I always heard that growing up. Money is the root of all evil. That's not what it says. Money can be the greatest good if you have a plan and you have discipline and your money is used to fund and fuel your purpose. The love of money can be the greatest evil. Aesop wrote all kinds of fables, and one of his fable, they're so simple, but they're so powerful, is of the dog and the bone. And the fable goes like this. A dog was given a juicy bone from the butcher. He was so happy with it. And he kind of went out to the edge of town and ended up sitting by a river. And the river was completely still. And the dog with the bone in his mouth looked down into the water and he saw his reflection, mistaking it for another dog with another juicy bone. And the dog thought, one juicy bone is awesome. Two juicy bones? And so he had a plan. He was going to drop his bone quickly, bark at that dog, scare it away. And when he scared the dog away, now he has two juicy bones. Of course, it wasn't an actual dog. It was a reflection. And the reflection was in a river. And so as he opened his mouth to bark, he dropped the one bone that he had and it splashed into the water and distorted his reflection. And quickly he realized his greed to get one more bone had left him with no bones at all. Very simple fable, like all of Aesop's fables, very deep meaning. If you cannot be content with what you have, if you cannot be content with what you've been given, then you are not prepared yet to be given more. And if you are not content with what you already have, the worst thing that could possibly happen to you is for you to get an increase. Because an increase of resource already birthed in discontentment will ultimately lead to disaster. This has been episode 29 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, for seeing what this is all about. I appreciate you guys who are subscribing, who are getting busy in the comments, who are sharing this on social media. I saw Josh Schwenke actually took the link, posted it on his Facebook, told people to come check it out. That really, really means the world to me. Thank you so much for doing that. for anyone who is just interested in looking at current events through ancient wisdom, it's a good podcast for them to check out. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Clayton Tyner. I love you guys. I'll see you on episode 30.